Hey, welcome back guys. This is Jason, KM4ACK. It's possible that you could find yourself in a situation where your solar panel was worthless. Let's talk about that and possible solutions to fix it. Stick around and we'll get right to it. Real quick before we get going today, I've got to give a shout out to these guys. They're my latest patrons over on Patreon. If you'd like to help support the channel, I'll leave a link to Patreon down in the description below. Before we start, I've got to give a big shout out to Tom. He's one of my patrons that brought this to my attention, and it's just something I had never stumbled across. And once he presented it to me, well, I had to do some testing and see it for myself and see how we could overcome it. So let me kind of set the stage for you. Lithium iron phosphate batteries have a built-in BMS circuit, a battery management service or something like that. Anyway, the purpose of the board, battery management system, I think that's it. The purpose of the BMS is to protect the batteries from being overcharged or over-discharged. It also does some load balancing and some other things. But the main thing of this is once the batteries get to a certain voltage, when they've dropped to a certain level, the BMS disconnects from the battery. Well, this leaves us with a problem, or at least in my case it left me with a problem, and in his it did him as well. When I connected that completely dead battery, now when I say completely dead, if you put a meter on this battery, because I've run this one until the BMS is tripped, if you put a meter on this battery right now, you will read 0 volts. So it's not just low voltage, there is no voltage there. And if I connect that up to something like the Power Mini and connect the solar panel, it will not charge that battery. Now, when I first heard about this and then tested it for myself, what I thought was happening was the solar panel just didn't have enough juice flowing through it to get the BMS restarted in the battery. However, that theory was completely wrong. It turns out a device like the Power Mini needs some juice in the battery in order to power up the computer in this guy. So if we have no volts on the battery, there's nothing to charge or to power up the Power Mini. So we've got to figure out a way to get at least some power going to the Power Mini so that we can turn it on and kickstart the charging process. Now, I've come up with a couple of different ways to do this that we're going to explore in here in just a second. Let me say, I don't recommend doing any of this at home. You run a risk of potentially damaging something. The better thing to do would be to prevent this situation from occurring to begin with. So we can do that with a couple of different ways. Again, with the Power Mini and with a lot of other solar charge controllers, we can set a low voltage disconnect. So if we look at a spec sheet for a battery like the Miata, we could take, and I didn't look at it so I don't have a good answer, but let's assume that it's set to its BMS is set to disconnect at 10.5 volts. If we simply take this device and set it to disconnect at 11, then the BMS never shuts off the batteries and we never run into this problem to begin with. The other thing you could do if you don't have a solar charge controller that's got a low voltage disconnect on it, then you could simply hook up a power meter in line with as you're using the battery, and then manually monitor that that voltage and that usage and make sure that you never allow the battery to get to where the BMS disconnects. All right, but now let's assume the worst case scenario has happened and you have run the battery until that BMS disconnects. How are we going to fix it? Again, I'm not recommending either of these solutions to you. This is basically just for educational purposes. I just wanted to show you what I did. It may not be good for the equipment, the solar panel or the battery or the charge controller. I have no clue. But it is something that I wanted to show to you guys, because if you found yourself in the field in a critical situation and absolutely had to make this thing work, well, I'm going to show you a couple of ways to make that happen. Okay, so let's take a look at the way we've got this set up. Right now, I've got the solar panel coming into the solar side of the Power Mini. I've got the battery hooked up and connected to the battery side of the Power Mini. Now, in addition to that, and hopefully we're going to be able to capture this screen on camera. It's a little difficult to get these LCD screens on camera sometimes. In addition to the battery connected, I've got a Y cable made up right here. On the other side of that Y cable, I've just got two bare wires. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a regular 9-volt battery, just like that, just an Amazon Basics 9 volts, not a rechargeable or anything, just a regular battery, and we're going to put it across these two wires. That should give us enough power to power up the Power Mini and get things kicked off. Let's give it a shot and see what happens here. So we'll do negative to negative, positive to positive, so that we're in parallel. And there's the Power Mini firing up. After it boots, I can take the battery off. Now I've just got the bare wires hanging out here, which we want to go ahead and disconnect. But you can see that we have kicked off the charge cycle. Okay, so once again, we have run the battery until the BMS took it out. Now this time I've got the battery just a direct connection to the Power Mini, and the other cable here is going out to the solar panel. Again, you can see that we have no charge going into the battery. This time we're going to take a completely different approach. Now, keep in mind, I was over on Bioenno's website, who's also another manufacturer for lithium iron phosphate batteries. And in their frequently asked questions, they specifically say, do not do this. So this is not good advice, not necessarily something you should do. But I do want to show it to you just so we can see it and see that it works. What we're going to do this time is we're going to go ahead and disconnect the battery completely. And I am going to take the charge controller out of the circuit. Now we're going to take the solar panel end and direct connect to the battery. We'll give this probably about 30 or 40 seconds. It's not going to take much. All we need to do is get the BMS to reset. Again, you should never try to charge your battery in this configuration, but it is something that we can use to get just enough juice into the battery to get it to start up the Power Mini or other solar charge controllers that might need just a little bit of juice to get going. So let's see if that's enough. I'll go ahead and disconnect the solar panel, and we'll reconnect the Power Mini. And hopefully you can see, well, it's not a great image on screen there, but the Power Mini did power up. Now it's beeping at me because it's a low voltage alarm. We can go ahead and plug up the solar panel, and that would begin the charging process. So what can we take away from all of this? Well, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So if you simply don't let the BMS take our disconnect from the battery so that we have 0 voltage on the terminals, that's the absolute best solution. However, if you find yourself in a jam and you've got to get that BMS reset so that we can start the charging cycle, well, now you got a couple of ideas of how you might accomplish that. Again, I'm not recommending either one of these solutions. If you damage your equipment, that's on you. All right, guys, be sure to give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you on the next video. Until then, 7-3.